Okay. Do you want to start us out, Kahle, or do you want me to?
I'll start us out. Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Am I just reading the
No,
dealio here?
just the hi, welcome to Loose Leaf thing.
Hello, welcome to Loose Leaf Author Podcast. I'm Kahle.
And I'm Charity. And today we have another guest with us, Benjamine Fife. He is an audio narrator, which kind of brings us to our first question. Do you want to ask that before he introduces himself?
Yeah, so we need to know this. Is it reading, narrating, or storytelling?
All three?
All three. Okay.
All three.
We didn't know what your title actually was, what you would like to be called. But Benjamine, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Well, when I'm talking about myself, I usually will refer to myself as an audiobook narrator. Though I did actually, for the first time recently, we were out shopping last week and met a guy, and we were at a bookstore, and he was sitting there reading Shakespeare. And so I started talking to him, and he said, "So are you a Shakespearean?" And I said, "Well, I am an actor," which that's the other thing, is that it's voice acting. But
yes.
It's kind of something that, as I've become a full-time narrator and whatever, I've really realized, yes, this is acting. And the things that I learned back in drama 25 years ago, I'm actually using now. I didn't waste those, 6 semesters in high school. I actually, I just held them in reserve for 20 years.
That's awesome.
That's really cool. So you said you waited 20 years from those classes. What brought you to audiobook narrating, to finally getting to use some of those acting skills?
Well, to say they just sat on a shelf would be a misnomer too. It's because what brought me to audiobook narrating. I've always loved reading. When my wife and I got married a little over 20 years ago, we immediately started reading out loud to each other. And I mean, we read, the first thing we read together was The Hobbit, but we eventually read like the C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, which is a little bit lesser known one than.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we named one of our kids after Ransom. So
that's awesome.
But anyway, it just continued. We'd pick books back and forth, and then when kids started arriving, initially, we were reading just little picture books and whatever. But about the time I think my oldest was 5 or 6, we started to begin with. I think we just read straight through the Chronicles of Narnia, and then I think we read Lord of the Rings and stuff, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, which the oldest's name is from Lord of the Rings, and
that is so cool.
Tell us the name. We have to know
this
now.
Is awesome.
Okay, the oldest is Eleanor, which is the name of the flower in Lothlorien, and also is eventually the name of Sam Gamgee's daughter. So it's a kind of peripheral Lord of the Rings name. It's not one that immediately, but it's also something where she met another girl, like almost her exact age, who spelled it the exact same way. And they're like, "No way, are you named from Lord of the Rings too?" And so it's kind of cool. But awesome. Why don't I just tell you all my kids' names and we can go from
yes, because it's fascinating.
The oldest is from Lord of the Rings, Eleanor. The second oldest is Adele, which is the little girl in Jane Eyre, and we don't spell it like that because it was my wife's middle name, so we spell it like her middle name. But then the third is Ransom from from Lewis's Space Trilogy, and then the fourth it's from probably thousands of books, but one of her names is Rose, but we got it from 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott specifically. Wow. And then our 5th kid, so we have lots of kids. Our 5th kid is Marco from Frances Hodgson Burnett's The Lost Prince, which that's another one that isn't very well known, but it's a great book. And then our youngest is Atticus, and people who don't know what that's from probably shouldn't have a podcast called Loose Leaf.
Right.
Go to the library.
Right.
But it's also something where we are officially done now, but I've told my kids we get to name their kids too. So
Yeah, there's a lot more on the list, guys.
there are so many. That's just it. We never named a kid before they were born. We'd go to the hospital or whatever, and we'd have like a list of 40 names.
And you're like, hello.
Who are you?
Percentage dice. Here we go.
Yes. That's awesome. I love it. Oh,
but anyway, so the original question was, how did I get into audiobook narrating?
Yeah.
So then in reading to the kids out loud, 9 times out of 10, it would be me who would read it. Usually, Lorene was helping with whatever baby or whatever, but I'd read it. And I just got into more and more doing character voices, which, I mean, you do Lord of the Rings, you kind of got to.
Yeah.
And we've read Harry Potter, we've read Jane Eyre, we've read pretty much every book that the kids are named after to the kids. Actually, with Marco, with the Lost Prince, we read it initially as a family when my wife was pregnant with him, and everybody fell in love with the name. So if there's anybody who was kind of named before they were born, it was him, because we're like, this has got to be Marco. But we've also since read it to him. He's now 6 years old, and that was honestly about the first book that in our nightly read aloud that we could get him to sit still and pay attention to. And since then he's actually come into it finally, and it's like, yes, okay.
Nice.
So after doing that for a few years, it was probably 12 or 13 years ago that I first thought I should try audiobook narrating. But, I was in different jobs. It was just chaos of things and whatever. But 3 years ago, my wife just said, hey, you should look at this website, this acx.com thing. You can audition for audiobooks. The next day I had a profile set up, and I took a little kind of helpful course for like a 5-day challenge thing. And within a week I was auditioning for books, and within a month I had a contract for 2. And then I just kept going. And last March 31st of 2020 was my last day at the day job. And
nice.
I love it. So
that's wonderful.
I love being a storyteller.
Congratulations.
Very much so. It's great to hear somebody finally get to do that was your goal, and now you can do what you love.
Well, the fun thing too, I mean, it was kind of my goal initially, and you can look on my website. I've got a blog post that kind of explains, how I got here. But my initial plan was maybe like 5 years down the road. And ultimately, it was just a little over 2 years from when I started that I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this full time. So I was pretty excited.
That's really cool. And so his website is bennyfifeaudio.com. And I'll make sure we have a link down in the notes for you so that they can come check you out. Okay. I know Kahle has a couple of questions for you, and then I have some as well, and we're just going to jump right in.
So
his will be a surprise.
We didn't discuss this.
I have a little bit of a background in radio, working for a college radio station for a while, and it was a blast. I learned a lot about storytelling there, doing narrations for classical music, like hours of classical music. And I grew up listening to Garrison Keillor tell stories, and actually I've gotten back into listening to LeVar Burton because of his podcast where he reads short stories. So good. But I was wondering, who were some of your what storytellers inspired you?
LeVar Burton would definitely be one.
Yeah.
I mean,
awesome.
I'm actually going to be doing, in conjunction with a couple authors I work with, and you guys are welcome to join in too. We're going to do a 30-day blog post challenge, and it's specifically about, books that you connected with as a kid in different ways. And one of them that I'm going to do is specifically about LeVar Burton and reading Rainbow. I mean, Butterfly in the Sky. and I'm an insufferable Trekkie, so that's the other side of things. But yeah, LeVar Burton, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart. There's so many, and some of yeah, as far as just storytelling, it's any decent actor is in a way a storyteller, but for those who actually do audiobook narrating, LeVar Burton is definitely one of them at the top of my list. George Goodall is pretty awesome too. Much different style, but I know there are others, but I can't list them off right off the top of my head.
Well, cool. Just a couple right there, and that's really great. Would you say there's anything specifically that you drew from hearing them reading, or did you just develop? Well, really, that's the question. Is there anything that you drew from them
that you pulled into your style of narrating?
With LeVar Burton, right off the bat, I remember as a kid watching Reading Rainbow, and I never felt like he talked down to me at all. And that's something that, to me, partially based on what I've read to my own kids, I don't talk down to them when I'm reading. I don't make it sillier or anything like that. Well, that's also a bit of a misnomer. It depends. There are some kids' books that after reading them 27 times, you've just got to change it up a little bit. So, but yeah, just the truly like capturing an audience. And my favorite book of all time is A Christmas Carol. And one of my favorite lines in it is, it's not a line he speaks, it's of Charles Dickens narrating in the background that he says, and he was the spirit that appeared was something like, it was as close to him as I am now to you, and I am in spirit at your elbow. And that's what it is. It's a matter of, to me, good storytelling is at least a three-way partnership between the author and the narrator. Sometimes they're both. Not that many authors can really pull it off, unfortunately. And three, the audience. And because it's something where, yes, I can give a great performance, the author can give a great book, but it's also ultimately the imagination of whoever's listening to it.
Yeah. Well, that was something. So just so our audience knows, the reason we found you is I actually listened to a book that you narrated, and I thought the story was really good, but what made it for me was actually your voice and the way you approached the story and the way you helped to bring it alive. So I really appreciate what you're talking about, that triangle partnership there, that it really is a partnership between those three people.
And the reason I'm turning around here, I thought I had it with me, but I must have said it somewhere else. It's King's Warrior is the book that yes. You listen to.
Yes.
And
is it Janelle
Schmidt? Janelle Leanne Schmidt. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yes.
So
yes.
These are the next three in the series, which is Second Son, Yorian's Hand, and Minstrel's Call, which Second Son should be going live on Audible sometime, I'm hoping within the next week. Yorian's Hand, I'm literally saving up the initial edits today, and Minstrel's Call, tonight I am starting on recording it.
Oh, wow. We'll make sure there's links for that too. I know, I was gonna say that one looks really big.
It's like the size of the other two next to it.
It's so exciting. So I think I mentioned it in our emails. What I really liked about you is you get in and you change your voice. And if you are telling a story, but you didn't overdo it. Like I've listened to some audiobooks where they try so hard to make each voice sound completely different that it's actually distracting. And so I personally liked your style of, it's different, but you get the emotion in there. It's, you know who's speaking when you speak, but it's not over the top. Was that a learned thing that you just all those years of reading, or did it come naturally?
I think in large part it was kind of a learned thing, and it's also just a personal preference thing because I'm the same way. Like I've done a couple of dual narration ones where like there was a well, I've done a couple with one of my daughters, and that's one thing. She's the main character, but she's a pretty minor part. Then I did another one with Meg Price, that's the Fringe candidate by Brad Swift, and that one, she did all the female characters. I did all the male characters, and it's I think there are people who really like that dual narration thing. For me personally, I usually prefer listening to just one, just because, I mean, the other main series that I've done is Jane Austen's Dragons up here. And with that, I'm doing lots of female voices. I'm also doing dragon voices from a little 4-inch dragon on up to what you traditionally think of as a dragon. Yeah. And that, you might take issue with it because it is significantly more extreme in the, I mean, I'm doing falsetto for April, the little tiny dragon. On down to Longburn, he's a grumpy old cantankerous wyvern. So, but at the same time, I mean, I do the female voices, but it's obviously still a guy narrating it, but it's with a different kind of inflection. It's not like I go into falsetto for the women at all, although sometimes with Mrs. Bennett I do. But that's more just because she's a squeaky kind of character.
Yeah, she really is. It's so funny because you talking makes me think of all these other questions, like how do you keep the, and I'm sorry, Kahle, just jump in and knock me out of the way if you want to ask a question. How do you keep them all straight? Because it sounds like there are lots of characters, especially in that series, and there were quite a few in the King's Warrior. How do you keep them straight and know where you're at?
King's Warrior, there was 67 characters.
I knew there were a lot, but wow.
She has been amazing in the partnership with her, because she gives me an Excel file with like what chapter each character appears in and everything. I mean, I read it myself beforehand. It's not like I just dive in and narrate it. There's a lot more to it than that. But it's also something where with each character, she said, okay, I want it to sound kind of like this person or this person. And so when I'd sit down to record, or actually I stand up, I'm standing up now, this is where I record. Okay. I just look at the notes, and it's not that I'm doing impressions of people, but it's kind of getting in a certain headspace. Like one character that she has in all 4 books is Kieran Kane, and she the actor who she said, like, I kind of, what I do with any of my authors is I say, who would be like your ideal cast for this if you were to do it as a movie? And so with Kieran Kane, she said David Tennant. And if I was doing David Tennant, I'm doing it wrong. But that's the kind of headspace that I get into. And as you listen through the rest of the books or read them or whatever, it's kind of something where it's like, okay, David Tennant really is kind of like the 10th Doctor. So
yes.
I mean, the Kieran Kane is like the 10th Doctor.
Okay, I followed you. I totally knew what you meant.
Yeah, okay.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So anyway, with your question, so it's a matter of, once I have a character in there, it's usually I can hang on to it and just get in that headspace. There are definitely times when I'm like, okay, this is a somewhat less major character. I need to go back and listen to what I did before. And though I do, am I always perfect with it? Heck no. But it's a place to start. So
yeah, yes. I think if I were to do that, I would have like voice memos on my phone with little character names and like a sentence of theirs, and be like, how did I do that voice? What is that?
You know, I've read things from other narrators, other more professional, more experienced narrators, that they're like, they make audio, they do an audio sample for each character. And I've thought about doing that, but I suppose I'm a little lazy when it comes to that. I'm just like, I just let it flow for the most part. I do refer back when I'm not quite certain, but which actually with the Jane Austen's Dragons, it's partially because it's been rather spaced out that I've done the books. And like, I just did a live reading from her next book last Saturday, and there were characters who were in 2 of these books, but it's been months since I narrated either of them. So I went back and I listened to those characters again before I did the reading, and it was fun. So
well, I know King's Warrior was 19 hours. Like I listen to things on normal speed. I don't speed it up. I like to enjoy it. And never once did I feel like you had slipped characters that you had forgotten. So I think it must be something natural in the way your brain works, that you're like, okay, you must understand that character enough that you can keep it throughout.
Well, it's also a matter of when I narrate something, especially fiction. By the time I've recorded the whole thing and edited it and whatever, I've gone through the book probably at least 4 times. And that's it. With King's Warrior in particular, I did more than that because I was about halfway through recording it and it was my turn to pick the family read aloud. And I'm like, I love this book. My kids need to love this book. So I read it to them too. So it got mildly confusing because I'm like, okay, what chapter are we on tonight, kids? They're like, okay, well, I'm like, 200 pages ahead of you, but then I'd be, editing and I'm like, oh, I'm just editing just what I read to them last night. So, and I just did it again with Second Son. we just finished Second Son last week. And I mean, there was a little bit more lag time between when I recorded it and when I read it to them. But also while I was reading Second Son to them, I was recording Yorian's Hand, and those two books are very connected, which little spoiler here, Second Son is a prequel.
Okay.
But it's kind of a mandatory prequel, and I completely understand why she did it as the second book. And it's
Are we going to
a lot
get
of the
Brant's story?
Yeah, that's what it is. So, and it's awesome.
Okay,
it's not my favorite of the series, but it also has some really good death scenes that are just fun.
Awesome.
And when I read it to the kids, I confess I had already performed most of it, and there were a couple of times when I'm like, okay, I'm doing the death scene, and at the end I said, there is another Skywalker. And sometimes, like, my older kids are like, sometimes I'll throw in weird things like that when I'm reading, and they're like, is that in the book? I'm like, no, that's not in the book.
Oh my goodness, you sound like someone I'd like to hang out with. Your family, my family would get along great.
we're uber geeks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So.
You're hitting all my checkpoints on Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. Like, keep them coming.
Stargate.
Yes.
Yeah, I love Stargate.
I still need to work through some of the, but anyway, we're diverging.
SG-1 is the best. So
yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I'm not much into space vampires, so I didn't really go for. I mean, I like we watched Atlantis all the way through, but SG-1 is where it's at. So.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I agree.
I diverged again.
I know, it's so easy. I'm like, okay, we won't geek out until we know we have time at the end. How's that? Let me get one in here, and then you can get. I know you have another one. You kind of talked a little bit about your working style and how you enjoyed working with Janelle. Is that kind of your favorite way to work with an author? Do you have certain things you wish authors knew when they approached you about reading their story that would make it easier for both of you?
Really, my favorite partnerships, there are 3 authors who I would probably do about anything for. And Janelle is one, Maria Grace is the other, and Brad Swift is the third, which Brad is, I'm doing this, I've done this series for him, which is the Zach Bates Eco Adventures. It's a more of a kid series, but it's has a magic cat and a flying dog and what all, but it's also something where he has just become a really good friend to me. And he first contacted me about the Fringe candidate about a year ago, and then it was about a month after I finished with the partnership on that with him when he posted something and he said, what do people want to listen to? And what do people want to read? And I messaged him. I said, I want to read something that you wrote so that I can narrate it. And he's like, okay. And we've been doing a monthly live reading with it was with him that I did a live reading of A Christmas Carol last month too. And but with all three of them, especially with Brad, it's been kind of a friendship thing almost first and foremost. With Janelle and Maria, they they're picky about their stuff, and I like that. I've got some books out there that I've narrated that I regret that the author didn't listen as closely as they should have, and there are a couple errors in there, and that it kind of ticks me off, because I'm like, I don't want there to be errors in there.
Right.
I don't want there to be, editing things, and there's actually a publishing company that I did 2 books for that I would never work with again, because they didn't even listen to through the thing. They just approved it once I was done with it. And the first one, because of the style of recording that I was doing then, it had significantly more errors. I don't think the second one has any errors, partially because I changed to punch and roll recording, which then it's nuts and bolts for narrators, but the editing is done more while you're recording rather than afterward. But yeah, I won't work with them again.
Yeah, that is so bizarre, because I know I have several books out, and I have a couple that I wish I could get re-recorded, because I didn't know as an author how picky to be. I was so excited somebody was willing to read it that I was just like, yeah, whatever, and I found that I've gotten pickier.
Well, and I've gotten pickier with myself too. It's like the first book that I did that a narrator, an author, which actually he'd be the 4th author who I'd do about anything for, is Cameron Taylor. He was I had done 2 books, and he's a local author. He's about an hour north of me here. My wife was reading this book of his and said, "Hey, have you seen this book?" And I'm like, "Oh, it looks cool." So I contacted him, and I've since done 5 books for him. And he also said, the fact that I've done 5 books for him should say it all, that he doesn't want to use anybody else. But it's also something where when he first gave the corrections for the first book that I did with him, I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's a continual growing experience. And I'm not going to lie, anytime you see a correction that is kind of subjective, you take it mildly personally. And but at the same time, he was really good about it. And like there was a character in his book that I pronounced the name wrong through the whole thing. So I had to go back and I've read about some narrators who refuse to, and I'm like, what kind of a jerk are you? It's not your book. And it was it a hassle? Yes, but it was also a really good learning experience. Have I made the same mistake again? A couple of times. But it's also something where, because of the way that he presented it, it helped me to learn and grow. And there's been things like with Maria's novels, they're it's gotten better as I've gone through it. I've definitely improving. But the first book, I had to completely re-record of the character's dialogue because it just didn't work. And but I would rather have an author who is like, I really want you to try this again. And there's also been times when, with Maria and with Janelle, that they're like, we need to redo this thing. And like, there's one character in one of the Dragon books that I re-recorded his dialogue 3 times.
Oh, wow.
But it was still pretty good. And ultimately, she's like, well, I think it works. I'm like, yes, okay. and I will also stick up for myself. I mean, if there's some minor character that I pronounce the name wrong and they didn't give me the specific pronunciation for them, I'm like, dude, the name's in there 15 times. I don't want to make 15 corrections for a single vowel that is wrong. Yeah. But it's also something where I let them make the final call on it. If a name is in there 70 times and it needs to be fixed, it's their book. I'm all for, standing up for myself, but ultimately it's more professional to say, okay, it's yours. Let's make this how you want it to be. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So on the other side of things, there are authors who, like, I have one author who you will probably never hear the book because I narrated it and I got paid for it. It was a paid finished hour gig, and she's never approved the whole thing. This is going on. It'll be 2 years this summer that it's been sitting there. And I'm like, I messaged her about a year ago, but I'm like, I've completely washed my hands of it at this point.
Wow.
So, but well, and with the with her in that one, she was picky to a fault. It was something where, like, there was a mistake that she pointed out every minute, and usually it was not usually, it was probably about 50% of the time was her writing that was being corrected too. And so it's like, whatever.
Oh man.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a pretty rough one right there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sad thing is, I liked the book, and she liked some things about my performance, but and she had some things going on in her life that just, but ultimately it's like, great, well, that's a month of my life that chalk it up to experience, which
but at least you got paid for it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
There's definitely that.
I know you had another one.
I do have one more question. I didn't want to jog too far away from this, but yeah, okay.
He was prepared.
You're super prepared for this. My question was, backtracking about however many minutes ago it was that you were talking about, air quotes, professional narrators, because I mean, dude, you're pretty professional. Come on.
Well, I'm thinking, like, the people who have like 500 titles under their belt.
I mean,
I have 41-ish under my belt now.
I mean, you're a fifth of the way there. So so what is the community of audiobook narrators like? Like, is there like a secret Discord chat that you guys all get on, or I mean,
do you have conferences?
How do you interact with many other narrators ever, or is it kind of a
there are some who I do. Okay. There are some who I do, and honestly, I am to the point where I've looked a little bit at. I've talked to some people who do voice coaching and whatever, but I haven't sat down and really committed to anybody yet. I want to get a decent voice coach, somebody who is like Sean Pratt or Karen Commons. They're kind of the Sean Pratt is known as the Ginger Yoda of of audiobook narrating, and he's one of these guys who has like 500 titles, and he has a lot of free stuff online that I've looked at, I've followed, and like some of the things that are on my website, like the way I describe my voice is because of videos that he's shared with, how to promote yourself. Karen Commons has a website called, I think it's Audiobook Narrators Roadmap or something like that. And she has some amazing resources there. But I am kind of to the point where I think I probably should get some real feedback from somebody who is a veteran. There's a difference between, professional narrator and a veteran narrator, I think, in the very least. And I'm not there yet. I'm professional in that this is how I'm supporting my family, but I don't have an Audi under my belt or anything like that. Not to say that I wouldn't love to get one, but actually, King's Warrior has been nominated. It's in the running for a Realm Maker audiobook of the year.
Nice.
Cool.
And it's one of the other questions you had is what's my favorite book that I've recorded, and it's definitely King's Warrior.
Really? That's amazing.
It's but at the same time, they're all kind of like my children in a way. So
my guess is that's what makes you a great audiobook narrator, is that you have this love of reading. You can get into that author's world, because I mean, someone can have a great voice and read a book, but you're not reading a book. You are participating in the storytelling side of it. You're living it so that the listener can live it as well. And that's, I think that's what I connected to when I listened to King's Warrior.
And that's honestly what I try to do, whether I'm narrating fiction or nonfiction, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, or whatever, or kids book. This is another one, Call to Purpose by Ken Brown. Like a lot of the books that I've done have some degree of royalty share, so I have a vested interest in seeing them continue to sell well. That's one he paid finished hour out of the gate with it. But it's a book that it's a very heady book. It's a visionary fiction, but it's also based on, I don't want to give too much weight, but it's a fascinating book. And that's the other thing I love about being a narrator is I get paid to read. I get paid to learn. And do I learn things from Jane Austen's Dragons? Actually, yes, I do. It's a matter of Jane Austen. The original Jane Austen was all about communication, and this takes it to like the next level, because there's this entire civilization culture, not so. There's this entire subculture of dragons and dragon keepers that the rest of the world doesn't know about, kind of like Harry Potter, Wizarding World, and whatever. But the dragons are forthright. They're not hiding anything. But humans by nature are all whatever, and so yeah, it's something where I love being able to learn from so many brilliant authors, and it's fun. I just did one, another one that is in quality control and Audible right now. That it's a nonfiction. That's Confessions of a Sensitive Man, an unconventional defense of highly sensitive man, or something like that. But it was fascinating too. So
that's
anyway,
amazing. That's wonderful.
That's so cool.
That's wonderful. So do you do most of your do you get most of your jobs through ACX then, or do you have other people that approach you through your website?
Until 2020, it was pretty much exclusively through ACX, although there were a couple of authors who I brought to ACX, Cameron Taylor being one of them, with his Way of Aloha series and a few others, and I'm going to be doing at least one more for him this year sometime. But in 2020, it was kind of interesting because I had been crunching numbers and figuring out, okay, how can I quit the day job and whatever, and the day job was becoming less and less fulfilling. And so I had it all planned, and initially I was like, okay, well, I think I can make this work in June. And then it got pushed up a little bit. I had a few really good, successful things happen. And then I was to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it March 31st. And then my wife and I talked about it, and like, okay, well, maybe we need to push this back at least until my next paycheck, which would have been like a commission paycheck. So I would have had a bigger paycheck with it and whatever. So it would have been another 2 weeks. Well, the next day I heard from Ken Brown about Call to Purpose. That was the Fringe Candidate by Brad Swift and Call to Purpose are the first two books that I did audition for Call to Purpose. He wanted me to record an audition for him, but they just found me, and I still need to ask Brad exactly where he found me. And same thing with Ken. I think Ken found me on the APA website, the Audiobook Producers Association. But so I got those two basically without auditioning, and then I auditioned for several others around that same time. That's when I got King's Warrior and Dark by Paul Arvidsson and a couple of other nonfiction ones. And then I'm like, when I found out I was going to get Call to Purpose and it was going to be a pretty hefty check. I'm like, okay, we'll go ahead and do March 31st. And I did. And then everything shut down, which I'm like, great, I was doing it anyway. But because everything shut down, there was like, I don't know for sure, but there was a flood of people who were like, oh, I should try audiobook narrating. So I think it's been in large part that, like, I went 9 months without landing an audition through ACX this year. And it's something, you know, I was also working my tail off narrating a bunch of stuff, but I like recording auditions regularly because it keeps my skills up to do something completely different style. And there are some, so there's some that I've auditioned for that the likelihood of my ever getting them is pretty darn slim, but it's an exercise. Like I auditioned for one last week that I didn't get, which I'm fine with, but it was a nonfiction, and they wanted it narrated in a British accent. I'm like, well, I haven't tried that. I've obviously narrated in British, but it was fun to, you know, take and bring my nonfiction style with a British accent. So it's just something that keeps my skills at a higher level. But yeah, so it was flooded with a lot of new producers and things. And so I started trying some other things this year, like LinkedIn. I started using LinkedIn heavily, and I landed 4 more gigs that I didn't have to audition for at all.
That's great. That's someone making LinkedIn work.
Yeah.
I'm on there, but I don't make it work.
And it's something where it's been fun. I mean, if you listen through all my titles, some of them are definitely better written than others, but I'm honestly okay with that. I like partnering with authors wherever they're at, and I have some that I'm not going to mention their names because they're learning and they're growing, and I'm learning and growing with them. But I'd still do it again with them, even with, you know, their possibly subpar writing. It's something where when I can read a sentence, and sometimes you do. I mean, whether it's, I mean, with Charles Dickens, you read a sentence, it's like, what does this mean? So it can be a long, convoluted sentence, and you have to bring meaning to it, or it can be a really short, subpar, whatever sentence, and bringing meaning to it. And I like to hope that my performance helps them to also become better writers. So anyway.
That's such a wonderful attitude to have. And I know as an author, I appreciate that, because I listen to mine and I listen to some of the first books I wrote, and I sit there and go, oh, the narrator sounds great, but all I hear are the repetitive words. And so I love that you can have that good attitude and forgive us as we learn and grow as well.
Now, we certainly notice it as narrators, though. And I let my kids in on the joke with Janelle's writing, honestly. Sure, I think her writing is phenomenal. I love her characters and her descriptions, and she gets better through the whole series. But especially, I haven't done the search through the PDF file for King's Warrior, but in Second Son, it says Arnaud nodded 30 times.
It's like, here we go.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
And actually, toward the very end of the book, I was reading it to my kids, and it got to the point where they were noticing it too, and so I'd say Arnaud nodded, ding, but towards the very end of the book, it said Arnaud acknowledged with a nod. And to which I said, which is to say, Arnaud nodded.
I love it.
And I mean, it's, any author does it. Charles Dickens has things that he redoes over and over again. But, and like Maria Grace, I pointed out to her after the first book, and I haven't seen it's gotten better as we've gone through them, that she uses the same, but in Pemberley, he dragged his hand down his face. I didn't do a search for exactly how many times, but it happens again. It was actually my wife who pointed that one out to me. Yeah. I was about I think I was about halfway through narrating it, and I got the books, and my girls read them, and she read them, and she's like, she has this people dragging, they always drag their hand down their face. And so I pointed out to her, and by the time you get to Kellynch, people are still doing similar kind of, facial things to think, but it's no longer the same thing over and over.
Yeah. So that is actually something we plan on talking about in the future on the podcast is our favorite things that we have to let go of, because we all have them and they're unique to each author. So that's good for you, though, for pointing it out, because I think I always hope, hey, can you point stuff out to me? Because sometimes as an author, you're just putting stuff out there and praying for comments and reviews so that you can know how to improve. So thank you for at least pointing that out to your authors and going, hey, did you know?
I should probably mention it to Janelle, actually, now that I was kind of waiting until I was, but it's also something where the most egregious error use of it is done now. In Yorian's Hand, there's 2 uses of it, because after the other ones, I'm like, I'm just going to search to begin with, and I think there's 2 uses of it in Yorian's Hand. So
that's wonderful. Nice. So she is learning and growing, and that's all we can hope for all of us. Yeah. That's wonderful. I think we've kind of covered all the questions we have. So other than this last one, outside of narrating books and outside of reading, because I know you're passionate about reading in your family, what are you passionate about? What else do you do?
Kahle, you mentioned you had some radio experience in classical stuff. Yeah. That's honestly kind of one of my dream jobs too. I am a classical music junkie, and it's not more than just a classical music junkie. I'm kind of an art music junkie. I adore world music. Cool. And my wife and I met in our music theory class in college. And we were somewhat insufferable in that class. There were other kids in that class who were kids. I mean, I was 21, she was 18. But there were other people in that class who were like, well, you guys shut up. We're glad you know how it all works. Leave us alone. But it's something where even going into college, I had a better understanding of music history than I'd like to say about any other freshman in that group had, just because I've always loved listening to classical music. I mean, honestly, most of my classical music education until college came from like the CD covers and from Fred Child on Performance Today.
Yes.
And he's my hero.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, it's also something where I'd love to eventually have a radio show, and I've got a couple of blog posts that I've done on my website, but it's not that relevant to everything else I do. But I'm a music nerd. I play trumpet, I play harmonica, or guitar a little bit, violin a little bit. My wife, honestly, is a much better musician overall than I am. She teaches music. She plays piano, violin, mandolin, ukulele, and voice, and teaches all those things too. But anyway, so I was saying, like, world music, I love how organic it is. Yeah. And it's something where that's one thing where my wife and I kind of differ, is that I love some of the more chaotic kind of thing. Like, give me, when we're talking classical music, give me the Mahler, give me John Adams, give me what is it, I can't remember the guy's name, the Mount St. Helens Symphony.
Oh gosh.
It'll come to me later, but anyway, I love like basically post Mozart.
Okay. Yeah, right on.
The more emotional, although I like Bach too, but Mozart, to me, I like his operas, but the rest of his stuff, his symphonies are okay and whatever, but most of it's just like,
he was a transitional
vanilla
character. Yeah,
it's vanilla. And Haydn
made that transition. Yeah,
Haydn, I kind of, I like some of Haydn's stuff. I actually like Haydn's keyboard stuff, and his later symphonies, but most of it is still kind of vanilla. But you get to Beethoven, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
Sturm und Drang.
Well,
And but yeah, you get into the Romantic era and then the 20th century. And there's, I mean, in the 20th century, you had anything and everything. And some of it, I'm not wild about, Schoenberg and whatever, but at the same time, there are things about theirs that has informed other things. I love like minimalist opera. Nixon in China is one of my favorite things, which is kind of borderline minimalist, maximalist. That's kind of John Adams. I actually have a John Adams book here.
Oh, awesome.
The John Adams reader. So anyway, he's one of my favorite living composers, John Adams, and his counterpart, John Luther Adams. They're both brilliant. But Nixon in China is one of my favorites. I also love Philip Glass. With one of these years, I want to listen straight through Einstein on the Beach. I never have. But yeah, minimalist opera doesn't agree with my wife.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't agree with a lot of people's wives, I guess.
But we do
cool.
like a lot of other stuff together. I mean, so. And there are also some incredibly simple pieces that I absolutely adore too. Like one of the most one piece that makes me just emote more than almost anything else is Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Pärt.
Okay.
Do you know that one?
I've listened to his music, but I can't.
It's one of the simplest pieces, but it makes my heart swell and brings a tear to my eye. So
yeah, awesome. I'll listen to that.
I don't even know how to write that one down.
ARVO. It's PART.
PART with an umlaut over the A.
Yeah.
So
the T is silent.
And there's what is it? There's also like the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs by Henryk Górecki. That's his name.
Okay.
So I'm the guy around like my wife's family. When they hear something, they're like, "What is that?" They're like, "Well, go ask him." And 9 times out of 10, I can figure it out. So, I've actually been on the piano puzzler once.
Cool.
What is this?
The piano puzzler? That's on Performance Today.
Okay. Okay.
It's just a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's his name? I can't remember the guy's name who does it, but once a week they have a contest where he takes a well-known tune and does it in the style of another composer, and they get a listener on the radio to guess it. And mine I did really abysmally because I didn't know the song very well at all. It was when I'm 64 by the Beatles, which I'm like, that's kind of a less well-known Beatles song. But I got the composer, and they led me to it, and the end of the thing, I said, well, yeah, I get by with a little help from my friends. So
fantastic. Well, cool. That is so awesome. I have mad respect. That was super cool to hear somebody else talk about classical composers like that.
Yeah.
Well, I should send you a link to his SoundCloud, because he did was it in
Sweet.
October? No,
in October.
September?
It was October.
Okay,
October. I did a song a day for October.
That he wrote and he played, and they're
cool.
Fun. They're fun. Like a minute, 2 minutes.
Actually, mentioning about the music in particular, on King's Warrior, the mandolin part, that's my wife playing mandolin. Which that's just the opening and closing credits, but she also did Delana's song that she sings in it. And
I know I forgot to ask you. I was like, it didn't sound like you singing.
Yeah, that's my wife. And she has a beautiful voice. Yes. And she's that's another thing, is a lot of sometimes in audiobook narrator forums and whatever, they'll say, what do you do when you get to a song in a book? And from day one as my audiobook narration career, the first book I auditioned for, she picked me because I sang her song in the audition, and she said I sang it exactly with the melody that she had thought.
Oh,
and
wow.
I just pulled something out of my hat, and that's basically what I've done with probably about 1 in 4 of the books I've narrated have some kind of music in them. And as long as it's something that's public domain or is unique to that book, you can do it. If it's something, if they want you to sing Bruce Springsteen, you got to get Bruce Springsteen's permission. Right. But with the King's Warrior ones, it's pretty much, I kind of make it up on the spot in some kind of modal thing, and then my wife kind of massages it a little bit better, and and we go from there.
Awesome.
That's fun.
But like with Cameron Taylor in both of the Way of Aloha books, I sing in both of those too, so it's fun.
I love that you can do this with your wife. You said your daughter read with you on some of them. I'm like, that's just really fun that you can do that with your family.
Yeah, it's
living the truth.
I love it.
Yeah, serious. Serious.
Well, I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that you really want to share with our listeners?
How can they reach you? How can they find you?
Yeah,
how can authors contact you to give you money to read for their to support your
Venmo,
project?
Zelle, or PayPal if I have to, though they take 3%. Venmo and Zelle don't. But anyway, the best place to get a hold of me is through my website, bennyfifeaudio.com. You can also email me at bennyfifeaudio@gmail.com. There was another question you had in there. I don't remember what it was.
I don't remember either, but I did think of another one. So originally I was going to ask if you had a preferred genre, but obviously you don't, because you do nonfiction, you do fiction. You're just like, all of it's good.
I have genres I won't do.
Okay.
Like horror, I'm not interested in horror, and erotica.
Yeah.
But honestly, aside from that, I do try to keep the stuff that I do to PG-13 or less. I do have another name that I've narrated 3 titles so far under that either it was a controversial subject or it kind of exceeded that envelope.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I've been able to stick to the PG-13-ish kind of thing.
Yeah. So how do you decide? Is that something you ask an author beforehand? Hey, is there anything in here that goes,
When initially when I'm looking for titles on ACX or whatever, like a lot of times you can tell from the description or in the audition material. I mean, like I just do a search for the F-bomb and see if it's there, and I've dropped the F-bomb in some of my books, but it's also something where it's kind of on a PG-13 level where it's like once, maybe twice. And actually there was one that it was with Chris Tavener that in Flight of the 500, there was a couple of F-bombs dropped in there, but it was very appropriate, if you ask me. Right. I'm like, if I were that character, I would have reacted that way too. But it's, ultimately, I look in the audition, and it's something where when I get the initial book, I'll glance through it. And there have been a couple of, scenes here and there that I'm a little less comfortable with, but as long as it's in that PG-13 level, I'm like, just go with it. I can manage this. And I'm not going to recommend my kids to read this one or that one, but there is one that I narrated under the other name that I'm like, it was really well written. It was a cool book. I mean, I had to look up so many words. There weren't many pages that I didn't have to, but it was also like, ain't no way my kid's listening to this.
Yeah. File this one in the back of the drawer. All right.
Yeah.
So that just makes me curious, when you do that, like, let's say you get something after you've accepted a contract. Do you just decide, hey, I'm using my little name over here so that it's not tied to my family, or how does that work?
That's pretty much what I've done. It's a matter of like this one, I knew it was going to have, I mean, it's a Greek thing, and I knew it was going to be very Greek. So it's direct. It's a somewhat modern retell. Well, it's more of an after the life retelling of one of the Greek demigods telling about his exploits to 21st century denizens of Hades.
Oh, wow.
So right off the bat, that's going to be kind of dark.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
But initially I was like, I could probably do that. And then when I got this, I looked through it. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do this under my name. And I just reached out to the publishing company that did it. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And I would love to work with that publishing company again. I'd love to work with that author again if he had anything he'd want me to do under either name.
Yeah.
It's if it was similar, I would still do it under the other name. But some of his other stuff that I've seen, I'm like, I'd be honored to work with him. So
Awesome.
That's cool. Well, do you have anything else before I wrap this up?
No, it's just been really great to talk to you. You're a really cool guy. I'm really impressed with everything you're doing, and you got a great voice.
And I took lots of, you probably can't even see that. I took lots of notes of people I need to look up, authors I need to look up, songs I need to look up.
So yeah, and Charity, if you have anything you want me to narrate, let me know. Do you write too, Kahle?
So I am.
We're getting him there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hillary and Charity are my cheer team.
Mentors.
Me into it. Yeah. So.
Okay. Cool.
I'm getting there. It'll be a minute. So I've still got the day job going on. So.
Well, I tell people it took me until I was almost 40 to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
And it's also something where I plan on living to 137, so I could still do 27 other things at least.
There you go. I know it's great because Kahle's at the very beginning of this journey, and he's so busy, but he has all this creativity, and it's just right now it's like fireworks. He's got a game he's building, he's got his music, he's got his writing ideas. And
one of the things I want to do, I want to be a writer too, but right now I'm building this career, and I'm going to do some writing along the way, but I'd love to eventually write my own stuff and narrate it, or maybe have somebody else narrate it if somebody else is a good fit for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 137-year-old thing, this is going to be really geeky and really weird. I want to live to 137 or just shy of it, because on January 1st of 2116, I will be exactly 50,000 days old.
Oh, wow. That's
nice. That is so
awesome
cool.
that you know that.
I learned that because of an Excel class I took.
Oh my gosh, that is so good.
You know the star dates in Star Trek, like 47988 and whatever.
Yeah.
That's what's known as a Julian date, and like there is a Julian date for now, and Julian dates for now are figured out from January 1st of 1901. But you can apply a Julian date to your own life, and that's what I did with. I'm like, and I'm like, dude, I'm 50,000 days old on January 1st, 2116, and it's really useless fact, but hey,
now I'll have to figure out my Julian date and get it put on my Doctor Who in Gallifreyan letters. And
oh man, that is so good.
Well, I've got you on my
was okay, awesome.
I know I have a series, and the first two books have two different authors because I loved the first guy. And then he got a job in an actual play on Broadway and didn't have time for me. So are you going to Broadway? I need to know that before.
I am probably not going to Broadway. Honestly, I love what I'm doing. Yeah. Would I like to maybe do some, I might get into some other voiceover eventually, but I am really loving being an audiobook narrator. I've heard it described as the marathon of voice acting, and it kind of is, but I haven't done any other voice acting, so I guess I'm just a marathon runner when it comes to that. I'm certainly not a marathon runner when it comes to life in general. But if I was, I'd have better lung capacity, which would help with narration. But I no.
Yeah. But what a great way to get free books.
Yeah.
You get to read everything.
Yeah, I've read more in the last year than many years before. So
that's wonderful.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh.
Well, we're gonna let you go because I know you've got a busy life. Lots of those books to get to, but we are so glad that you joined us tonight and today, that you could share with us what you love and the things you like about it. And like I said, we've got lots of great authors here to look up and find your books and get to listen to you. And
all right,
we're just so glad you were with us.
Thank you for having me, and let me know if you want to talk to me again.
Okay.
I can ramble endlessly.
Yes. Well, we have a thing we like to say when we sign off, and it is, you can join us if you want. We'll practice it once because we're really bad at it, aren't we?
It's
a lot of editing to get it together, but we like to say keep writing or start writing. So
do you want to start us off?
Sure. Keep writing or start writing.
Start writing.
See, we're all
that was abysmally spread apart.
It is every time, and then I get in there and I edit and I squish them together. I'm editing. I'm learning too. It's a learning experience. So
all right.
A lot about
thanks again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. You have a wonderful night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.